Alright, you've read the title, you know why you're here, and today I'll be explaining why are there no psychic custodians. First of all, I'm gonna have to explain what psychos and custodians are. Starting out, perfection. Custodians are pure perfection. If a space marine is a high-quality, mass-produced product, a custodian is a masterful work of art and perfection that no one can ever imagine. What a space marine is to a guardsman, a custodian is to a space marine. If you want more insight on custodians, what they do, what their roles are, please watch my last video. It explains everything you need to know about custodians. Watch that and come back. And if you don't want to, then that's fine. Okay, what is a psycho? If a normal human soul is like a torch, a psycho's soul is a bonfire. And a soul of a space marine librarian, the librarians being the psychic space marines, is a raging inferno. Now, being a human psycho is good. You have a bunch of crazy powers, but it's really bad because congratulations, you just used your powers to summon lightning to defend yourself. Congratulations. You just exploded. Congratulations, you just turned into a horrible warp abomination. Congratulations, you got chaos corrupted. Congratulations, you are now possessed by a demon. Not fun. And Space Marines do have a higher level of resistance, not only because, again, they are Space Marines, but because they're properly trained on how to, control their powers. There are sanctioned cycles that the Inquisition will take and then teach how to use their powers, but many of these guys will end up getting possessed, going crazy, and have to be put down. Obviously, the Space Marines ones, though, are stronger-willed and trained on how to deal with warp shenanigans. Now, what is a Space Marine Librarian? Space Marine Librarians are Space Marines that are wizards, essentially. You're a wizard, Harry. I'm a what? Yeah, they are really strong. They're much stronger than normal Space Marines. And in fact, back before there were Space Marine chapters, there was an entire legion of Psychic Space Marines known as the Thousand Suns, and their Primarch, Magnus the Red. Now, these guys, pound for pound, were the strongest Space Marine legions by far. Although some guys, like the White Skies and the Ultramarines and many of other chapters, did have Librarians, the Thousand Suns were almost entirely Librarians. Yes, they had non-psychic individuals, but they were mostly just support for the big boy cycles. The problem is, you know how some Space Marines have genetic mutations? Like the Space Wolves will sometimes turn to the wolf and wolf abominations. The Blood Angels will sometimes go berserk, wanting to kill everyone and drink everyone's blood. And then those, less bad mutations like the Raven Guard, which will just get pale skin and become emos. The Thousand Suns, you know how the whole shtick was they use warp shenanigans, throwing lightning at people? Yeah, they had a thing where they'd turn into this. This was called the Flesh Change. You know how normal, Space Marine cycles and whatnot, if they overuse their powers, they will turn into stuff like this, and that's why they have to limit their powers? Even if a Thousand Sun incredibly limited their powers and didn't even use the warp powers, like you had the non-cycles in their legion who just turn into this, even though they weren't being exposed to too much warp stuff. So because of that, and just general prejudice against psychos, 3 legions, the Dark Angels, the Death Guard, and the Space Wolves, took them to trial trying to ban all psychic stuff from the Space Marine legions. And on the other side was obviously Magnus and Jagakai Khan of the White Skies. Jagakai was really only there because he hates authority and he doesn't want people telling him what to do. So this event, called the Council of Nicaea, psycho powers were banned from Space Marine legions, learn of the heresy, and would try to use their psychic abilities to warn the Emperor of the Horus heresy. And the Emperor of Mankind, when Magnus essentially used this spell to go across the galaxy to warn the Emperor, he was met with a shield that was blocking him out of terror, but an entity known as Zinch, just a funny little guy, offered him the power to break through that wall and to warn the Emperor of the heresy. He then took the deal, used Zinch's power to break through that wall, and then warned the Emperor. But inadvertently, that psychic energy wall thing that he broke was the wall the Emperor put up to stop demons from invading Terra and the Webway. the Human Webway Project, which was going to cut humanity off from the warp. The Magnus broke that and then was cast out by the Emperor. Magnus loved the Emperor of Mankind a lot, like really loved him. So he felt like he was betrayed by the Emperor not only at the Council of Nicaea, but now betrayed when he was just trying to warn the Emperor of Horus's rebellion. So the Emperor of Mankind sent the Space Wolves to go collect the Thousand Sons and their Primarch Magnus, but that communication was intercepted by the traitor Horus, who then told Leman Russ to go kill the Thousand Sons and their Primarch Magnus. Now, Magnus at this point was in a horrible episode. He felt was betrayed. He was emotionally destroyed. He was straight up just going to allow the Space Wolves to kill him and their entire legion. But instead, essentially halfway through the Space Wolves' slaughter of Prospero, the Thousand Sons homeworld, they appealed and challenged Leman Russ to a duel, which he eventually lost and got his back broken. But because Magnus wasn't really a guy, he was he was essentially psychic energy given flesh. When Leman Russ broke his back, he didn't actually break his back. He simply shattered Magnus into multiple shards. One of the shards that was separated from the main body was Magnus's noble shard. With his nobility gone, that little wacky guy, Tzeentch, then offered him a deal to join Tzeentch and to join Horus's rebellion. Feeling like the Emperor of Mankind betrayed him 3 times, he took the deal and turned traitor. Now, why does this whole saga even matter? After all, this is a custodian video, and I'll get to that in just a second. With Magnus turned traitor, the only one strong enough to sit on the Golden Throne was the Emperor himself. He could only leave for short bursts from sacrificing thousands of people or from having Malkador sit on the throne. And Malkador was only strong enough to sit on the throne for a few hours, and the entire time it was ripping his body apart. So the only one strong enough to sit on the throne permanently was the Big E. Now, after the heresy, Gilliman reinstated the librarians in all the Space Marine legions, except for the ones that didn't want them, except now legions were broken into chapters by Gilliman, so every chapter would have a couple dozen librarians. Except still, even though the Ultramarine librarians, for example, didn't have the flesh change, they still had to be careful. They could still get corrupted, they could still have demonic infestate, they could still be demonically possessed, and they could still kind of just explode or get warp mutations from using their powers too much. So even though they didn't have the flesh change, they still had to be careful how much power they used, limiting their power. Except, you have a Space Marine chapter called the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights don't use Gilliman's gene seed. They don't use any of the Primarch's gene seed, in fact. They use the Emperor of Mankind's gene seed. Now, what separates the Grey Knights from everyone else besides just using the Big E's gene seed? First of all, they're all cycles, and because they use the Master of Mankind's gene seed, they're all totally incorruptible. Not a single Grey Knight has ever fallen to chaos, and they're bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter than normal Astartes. And on top of that, they're better at range and better in melee, on top of being... And that's not even their specialty. Their specialty is psychic abilities. Lightning, telepathy, all the psychic stuff. Now, the only thing that is... Now, one thing to note is that although they are bigger and stronger, again, their main, they get like 90% of their power from all being cycles, who, unlike normal Space Marine librarians, are unrestrained because they are incorruptible. So these guys are super powerful just because they can use all those psychic abilities without worrying about chaos. Now, you might be wondering, well, if they're so strong, why didn't they just make psychic custodians? Custodians would be even stronger. Think about it. They didn't have to make all the 10,000 custodian cycles. They could just make a shield host or 2. I believe the reason there are no psychic custodians is because 1 or 2 of these psychic custodians would have been strong enough to sit on the Golden Throne. That's why he made psychic Grey Knights, but not psychic custodians, because although the Grey Knights are powerful, they are essentially just Astartes 2.0. They're nowhere near the power of Custodians. So if Custodians could use psychic abilities, if they did have psychic Custodians, I believe not only would these guys be infinitely more powerful, they would also be strong enough to sit on the throne, meaning the Master of Mankind could then get off the throne to either respawn or to regenerate from his wounds. Because the Golden Throne is constantly whipping him apart, but he's constantly regenerating, but because he was injured in the first place, it's a very slow cycle of him getting worse and worse over time. So if he could simply have someone else sit in the chair for a few days, or even years if he needs to die then respawn, then the Imperium would stay functioning. Meanwhile, the Big E comes back in just a few years. Now, why would the Big E want to be stuck on the throne and wouldn't want to regenerate? After all, wouldn't having the Emperor of Mankind help humanity out? I believe the Master of Mankind wants to be on the throne so he could be bathed in psychic juice for 10,000 years. All the worship that he's getting has made him so much stronger. Infinitely stronger than he was as a mortal. Yes, a perpetual and a very strong mortal, but still a mortal, not a god. So that is why he essentially went around the galaxy looking like a god, acting like a god, presenting himself as a god, meanwhile saying, don't worship me. He knew people were going to worship him. The Emperor of all people knew mankind the best, and he knew that people would worship him. And that was all part of his plan. And that's also why I covered the whole Thousand Suns debacle, because guess what Magnus the Wed's purpose was? It wasn't to be a space wizard. I mean, yeah, it was. But it was to be a space wizard who was supposed to sit on the chair so the Emperor could, do his thing. If the Emperor of Mankind, from Magnus's perspective, hadn't betrayed Magnus 3 times and mentally broke him, he wouldn't have fallen to Tzeentch. He would have been loyalist, and he would have been sitting on the throne, so that way the Master of Mankind could then regenerate or do what he has to do. That's why he made sure there's no psychic custodians, and why Magnus fell to chaos, so that way the only one strong enough to sit on the throne would be him. Because if he gets off that throne, if someone takes him off to, let him regenerate, the entire Imperium collapses. So you need someone on that chair, and he made damn sure that the only one who could sit in that chair was him. Now I know what you're thinking. Why would the Emperor of Mankind want that? It's because he wants to become a god. That's because there's only 2 ways to defeat the Chaos Gods. Chaos being humanity's #1 enemy. Either A, you overpower them, which is what the Emperor is going to do because he's getting stronger and stronger every day. Or B, you kill all humanity and strive out the Chaos Gods. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want to do that second option. So his plan was to make people worship him, even though he was telling them not to, so that way he could then be bathed in warp juice, so that way he could then, surpass the Chaos Gods. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Justin, the Emperor was going to become the Dark Prince, the 5th Chaos God who was going to defeat the Chaos Gods and defeat Horus. Now, in case you're wondering, in case you need some context, during the End in the Depth, the Emperor of Mankind was taking in so much power from the Warp because Horus was on so much Chaos Juice that Horus became more powerful than the Emperor. So the Emperor was making himself more and more powerful so he could then defeat Horus. But because he was taking in all this negative and evil warp juice, he was going to become the Dark Prince, dooming humanity to its death. So technically, yes, he would be a god of humanity, but kind of like an evil, twisted one. Kind of like how Slaanesh is technically a god of the Eldoi, but she's obviously a sick, twisted one. The Emperor of Mankind was going to become that sick, twisted version of the Eldoi god, but for humans. If he would have, do the Dark Prince route by just taking power from the warp and making himself stronger. But instead, what he did, he was playing some 4D chess. And although it would take a bit longer, about 10,000 years in fact, to then gain the power to surpass the Chaos Gods, 10,000 years plus, we don't know when he's going to wake up. Instead of becoming a sick, twisted god for humanity, by bathing in humanity's worship of him, he would then become a good god of humanity. Kind of like the original Eldoi gods as opposed to Slaanesh. And this was his plan all along to defeat the Chaos Gods. And he couldn't tell anyone this because he had the persona of a Giga Atheist. Now, in case you're wondering why he couldn't just tell all of his sons about Chaos, is first of all, he kind of denied it to them, and in my opinion, he denied them the knowledge of Chaos so that way they'd eventually fall to it. That's a big reason why I think he was straight up just a dick to some of his Primarchs. Like, Poltarabo wouldn't have fallen to Chaos if the Emperor wasn't an asshole to him. Horus and the Phoenician wouldn't have fallen if the Emperor just told them about Chaos and told them to be careful. But he wanted all those guys to turn traitor, so they would then injure him and entomb him on the throne. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, why wouldn't he just, go around telling people to worship him and then, gain the worship while, not being on the throne? And I think a part of that is, A, the Primarchs would not approve. Instead of 9 sons rebelling, it probably would have been 17. Lorgoy would have stayed loyal, obviously, in this scenario. And that's a big reason why he punished the World Bearers, because the World Bearers were trying to get people to worship him, because he needed his worship. He needed the people in the know to think he didn't want the worship, even though he did. That's why he punished the World Bearers, because he knew that either way, the Imperial cult was brewing, and that eventually, after his entombment on the throne, he would then be worshipped. Which would then, gain the power. You get the gist. Because none of the Primarchs, except Lorgoi, would have accepted the Emperor of Mankind becoming a god, or would have even accepted that that was his goal. Because the entire reason Horus rebelled and got Chaos corrupted is because the Chaos Gods gave him a vision of people worshipping the Emperor. Obviously, given just how disgusted he was by people worshipping him, obviously he couldn't then go out and say, "Hey guys, I want people to worship me so I can then become a god." It could also be the fact that he wanted to be a more mystique guiding figure as opposed to a direct ruler. Look at Jesus, for example. In the Christian faith, they believe Jesus is guiding us and that Jesus does protect, but he's not, like, right there, beating up heretics. He's not right there, feeding the hungry. He's not there in flesh and blood doing it. The Emperor of Mankind could want to be kind of like a Jesus scenario where, Jesus died on the cross, the Emperor suffers on the golden throne. He wanted to be more of a mystique figure as opposed to a direct god who was a king who was also your god. He wanted to be more of a myth figure. That could be one of the other reasons. Heck, back to the custodians, the whole point of this video. Sorry I didn't spend too much time talking about them. The custodians are the masters of the physical realm. They can kill you if you're anchored to the physical realm. The problem is, with all sorts of warp shenanigans, not everything's anchored to the physical realm. You have stuff like this that isn't anchored to the physical realm, and so they either need warp shenanigans to fight fire with fire, which as we see with the Grey Knights, is the most effective method, fighting fire with fire, but instead the custodians fight fire with a fire extinguisher as the forms of the Sisters of Silence. Don't get me wrong, these sisters are badass and super strong and great warriors. I think they should have had both, but just think about how OP a Space Marine is. Then think about how OP a Space Marine Psycho is. And then think about how powerful a Librarian is. And then think about how powerful Custodian is. And then imagine that Custodian as a Psycho. Obviously powerful enough to power the Astronomicon, and on top of that, being more than powerful enough to dispel and destroy demons with all sorts of warp stuff. But instead of fighting fire with fire, the Emperor of Mankind went with the blank method, blanks being people who essentially don't have souls, and their near presence can destroy all sorts of psychic shenanigans. He went with that method as opposed to the psychic custodians, which in my opinion would have been a better idea. And so yes, the Horus Heresy was planned, Magnus falling to Chaos was planned, all the 9 Primarchs who fell to Chaos was planned, and on top of all of that, the reason though I know Psychic Custodians is because the Master of Mankind wanted to make damn sure that there was no one strong enough to sit on the chair besides him, so he could then be presumed as this myth type, that has this self-sacrifice myth type character, so that way people could then worship him, so that way he would then eventually surpass the Chaos Gods in power, and would eventually go on to defeat them. Now, obviously, that last point hasn't happened yet, but I promise it will. Or, hopefully it will. They obviously will never do that, because they need to be able to sell more plastic crack, but from a narrative perspective, although this would never happen, it could happen, and I think this was the author, and I think this was some of the Black Library authors playing some 4D chess, or maybe I'm just reading too far into it. So yeah, if you like this theory, then please make sure to like, subscribe, do everything the Chaos Gods of YouTube like. Sorry this was a long one. I'll be doing more videos on Factions Explained soon. And if you like this one, please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, do everything the Chaos Gods of YouTube like. And even if you didn't like it, maybe you could like it. You watched this far anyway. Yeah, so what do you think of this one down in the comments? And remember, it's just a theory, a game theory. Thanks for watching.